talked into my taking. She got talked into my taking accordion, which was about as far from where my head was at. That it didn't last very long. And I finally, she gave up. I got rid of the accordion. At that point, I got all, those things. No, I mean, Weird Al made a thing out of it. His thing. But no, I was just, well, actually, it was teaching me the basics of music. I mean, you do get it'll do that, but I just hated the sound of music so much. I just didn't get behind it. I wasn't bright enough to see, okay, I don't have to live with this forever. Exactly.
New age rock accordion is all great, right?
Not very Yeah, well, I didn't know from that time. It was just some guy coming and teaching me. Just some very basic songs, or pop songs of the 50s, right?
Yeah.
And I just wasn't into pop songs of the 50s. I did like some Dutch and Western. I remember the first, I was, remember the song about St. Bismarck? Well, anyway, it was an old, from World War II. Bismarck was battleship from World War II. And they did a lot of, they made music out of it. And one of the songs that seemed to become rather popular was, St. Bismarck. And there's the other one. Talked about the New Orleans. I like driving. I mean, this stuff is drawing. Wrote it all with the you do it all. I mean, you do everything. I mean, it covers your bass keys. You can change the thing to travel. So anyway, now my best friend at the time. Yeah. So you can play up, you can play the phone. Okay, David, I am in the kitchen and I don't hear anything. Hope you can hear me. All right, nothing at all. Volume all the way up. It is all the way up, and still there is nothing here.
Just too bad. That's the way it goes. They cut these wires so short.
These are the best little masks. They're the Korean ones. KN94. And they come with color. It has blue. And online, Amazon. But I made sure that they were actually manufactured in Korea. Okay. Yeah, they're real. Right. I mean, I've got some of the KN.
Oh, it's one of those.
Color coordinates. Hello there. I am doing fine. It is good to see you. Finally. But that makes it easier, and then they fold up and go in my purse. I'm really thrilled. Do we have a brass bowl? Yeah.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Full of masks in their little containers, in their little plastic containers, right by the door. Just grab them. Just grab them. Yeah. My allergies get to me when I get into a place that has dust on it. So I just drink there. Oh, did we light any helper candle yet? No, we did not. Thank you.
Sore, really.
1 minute.
Good morning and welcome. These words were adopted by this congregation on May 16, 2021 at the annual meeting. We give thanks for the earth we are on at First Unitarian Church of Toledo and to the people who were here before us. We are thankful to the people of the Miami, Peoria, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and others for our presence here. We extend an especially warm welcome to those of you that are visiting today. Please take note of the cards in the hymn rack in front of you. There is the little yellow card that if you are interested in filling out with your contact information, we will add you to our email list so that we can send you our weekly e-news of events happening here at the First Unitarian Church. There is also this beautiful quilt card, which you are welcome to take home with you. On the reverse side, it has information about important contact information for people here at church. And there is also a donation envelope if you are interested in making a donation. Pardon me one moment. I am happy to let you know that Reverend Tim has received his stem cell transplant. He reports that the actual transplant went well and fast. He said that his recovery will take some time, however. He and Jewel are most grateful for the cards that you all have sent, and keep those cards coming. And notice that handsome photo of Reverend Tim. He just has a little bit less hair than what we're used to. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Reverend VanBecelaere. Reverend Joan VanBecelaere is a retired Unitarian Universalist minister. She has served as the executive director of UU Justice Ohio and as a congregational life consultant for the Ohio Meadville District and the staff lead for the Central East Regional Group. Before holding this position, she was vice president for student services at Iliff School of Theology in Denver, Colorado, where she taught UU polity. She lives in Columbus with her spouse, Jerry, and 4 felines, all named after Hebrew Bible prophets and kings. After the service, you can ask her the names of those felines. There actually are no announcements today. For our opening words, this reading, Be About the Work by Andrea Hawkins Camper. May we see all as it is, and may it all be as we see it. May we be the ones to make it as it should be. For if not us, who? If not now, when? This is answering the cry of justice with the work of peace. This is redeeming the pain of history with grace of wisdom. This is the work we are called to do, and this is the call we answer now, to be the barrier and the bridge, to be the living embodiment of our principles, to be about the work of building beloved community, to be a people of intention and a people of conscience.
Our chalice lighting words this morning are brought to us by the Reverend Scott Tayler. We come with our doubts, worn out, worn down, wanting once again to trust, to believe that hope is not as fragile as it sometimes seems, that division is not as deep as it sometimes appears. And so we light this flame as an act of faith, a reminder, a redeclaration, a rekindling of the trust that darkness can't ever shut out the light, that kindness is more powerful than we'll ever know, that humility and accountability allow us to change, and that together we can most certainly bend the arc of this beautiful universe towards justice.
Please join me in reciting our covenant. This can be found in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now for our opening hymn, number 155. You're invited to sing along.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
Now, our wisdom story for all ages today is a very ancient Sufi tale about a little mountain stream who wanted to join the big, beautiful blue ocean. And she was determined that nothing was going to stop her. She danced around the big mountain boulders. She pushed aside the small rocks. She gurgled over the gravel in her path. And the little stream went under bridges and through deep green valleys. And along the way, she watered green plants. She pooled under cool shade trees. She provided water for animals, plants, birds, and fish. But nothing was going to stop her from reaching that big, beautiful blue ocean. Nothing until she came to the huge, sandy, brown desert. Now, the brown desert extended as far as the eyes could see, vast stretches of dry, hot, burning sand, no green plants for her to water, no cool shade trees to pool under, no animals to drink from her waters, not even boulders to dance around or gravel to gurgle beneath. Sheets of heat shimmered above the surface of the sand, and everywhere the little stream looked, there was desolation and death. And it was the most horrible sight the little stream had ever seen. But there was no way to flow around it. The desert stood between her and the big, beautiful blue ocean. She had no choice but to try and cross this horrible wasteland. So, mustering her confidence as best she could, the little stream gathered herself up and started to cross the desert. But then all of her waters disappeared into the sand. Well, again, she gathered herself up and she moved out into the desert, and her waters disappeared like before. Again and again she tried, and again her waters just disappeared. And this was making her very frustrated and very, very afraid. Suddenly, she heard a voice in the wind, and it said, "The wind can cross the desert, so can a stream." The little stream protested, "Well, the wind can fly and I cannot." The voice responded, "Then change. Let yourself be absorbed by the wind." "No," cried the stream. "I want to remain the same stream that I am today." "That's not possible," said the voice of the wind. "But your essence can be carried forward by the wind and become a stream again. You forgot your essence." Well, then the little stream remembered that long ago she had once been held in the arms of the wind. And so bravely she let herself evaporate into vapor and rise into the arms of the wind, which carried her across the desert and then let her fall gently as rain in the far mountains. And there she became a stream again, even bigger than before, and she continued her journey to join the big, beautiful blue ocean. And there are times, like the little stream, when we have to let go of those things that keep us stuck, that keep us from growing. And sometimes we have to change, even though that can be really scary, if we are to become what we are truly meant to become. And now Bonnie Rowe is going to play for us our centering music, Step by Step, number 157. And you're free to follow along in the gray hymnal if you like.
Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none.
Please join me in a time of prayer and meditation. Knowing that we do not always live up to our best expectations of ourselves, let us in quietness seek the good within, which some call inner light and others a spark of the divine. Knowing that we live in a society which falls far short of the ideal, let us in quietness resolve to do one thing this week to aid those suffering from want or injustice. Knowing that the earth is our home and we have too often abused and poisoned it, let us in quietness consider how we might be part of making it more healthful for all living things. Knowing that we face a pandemic that is hurting too many of us at this time, knowing that there are people suffering as well in Ukraine, let us in quietness pray for those who are suffering and resolve to support one another through these times. And knowing that each of us has some sorrow or anxiety hidden within, let us consider in quietness how we may reach out to one another with our smiles, even if behind masks, or with our hands in assistance and encouraging words. So let us pause in silence now as we consider these of our intentions. May it be so, and blessed be.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our reading this morning comes from the Hasidic tradition. The theologian Martin Buber tells the story of the great Hasidic Rabbi Zusya of Hannipol. After a very long and very blessed life, Rabbi Zusya was dying. Now, while he was on his deathbed, the rabbi began to cry uncontrollably. Well, his students and his disciples, they all gathered round and they tried hard to comfort him. And they asked him, Rabbi, why do you cry so? You are almost as wise as Moses, and you are almost as hospitable as Abraham. And surely heaven will judge you favorably. Zusya answered them, it is true. When I get to heaven, I won't worry so much if God asks me, Zusya, why were you not more like Abraham? Or Zusya, why were you not more like Moses? I know I would be able to answer these questions. After all, I was not given the righteousness of Abraham or the faith of Moses, but I tried to be both hospitable and thoughtful. But what will I say when God asks me, Zusya, why were you not more like Zusya? Now, I grew up reading the cartoon Peanuts. And one of the cartoons showed Linus complaining, there's no heavier burden than a great potential. So today, I want to consider the question that Rabbi Zusya feared so much. But instead of asking about the potential to be like Rabbi Zusya, I want to ask us if we can live into our potential to be more like the Unitarian Universalists that we want to be. Now, I know that 2021 was a difficult year. And of course, there were some good things that came out of it. You know, effective vaccines for COVID are now available, and that's why we're here this morning, in person too. We know the minimum wage is higher for a lot of people in different states. But in 2022, we're still dealing with COVID, We're still dealing with economic inequality being made worse by inflation, and we see escalating climate emergencies. And 2022 brings a growing erosion of democratic norms and suppression of the right to vote and our freedom to speak out and protest. To me, it's been really scary to hear respected figures like former President Jimmy Carter say that America is now in the fight of its life. And this year will test our resolve to protect and promote the ideal of a multiracial, multicultural democracy. Now, these issues we face in 2022 are challenging on a personal and political level, but they are also religious and faith issues that challenge our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist principles. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we do not have a creed, but we do covenant to affirm and promote a set of core values, our principles. And these are central to our identity as UUs. Now, we didn't come up with these things overnight or even back in 1961 when the Unitarians and the Universalists consolidated. But instead, our principles, in one form or another, have been part of our identity since 1803 on the Universalist side and 1887 for the Unitarians. And today we are considering adding a new 8th principle. And just to remind you of that, it's to covenant and affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. That's the wording of the 8th principle. Now, of course, when we talk about changing our principles, adding something to it, we hear people cry out, "Oh, how dare you change the principles? You will destroy Unitarian Universalism." It's almost as if some folk think that the principles were carved in stone tablets and carried down from Mount Sinai. No, they were not. But thankfully, our principles have evolved and changed many times during our history in order to meet new and unforeseen challenges. And that's because we're a living faith. Now, our Universalist ancestors articulated a principle of social justice from the very start. Their first statement of faith, the Winchester Profession, in 1803, included an article that said, "Believers ought to be careful to maintain order and practice good works, for these things are good and profitable unto humans." Well, they used man, but I'll use humans. In 1935, the Universalists included a belief in the power of people of goodwill and sacrificial spirit to overcome all evil and progressively establish the kingdom of God. And then our Unitarian Puritan ancestors believed that revelation was not sealed, and the Holy Spirit had spoken and would continue to speak to individuals. So that meant anybody in a congregation could hear the Spirit and had a right to speak their truth. Now, out of this evolved our principle of honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person and use of the democratic process. Then in 1887, after the chaos of the Civil War, society was experiencing changes in science and education and race relations and religion. Well, these changes led to a division between conservative and liberal Unitarians. Yes, conservative Unitarians. The big question, was Unitarianism going to be a liberal Christian movement, albeit without belief in a Trinity? Or would Unitarianism widen its circle to include humanistic theology and universal ethical principles as the liberal wing demanded? Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of this controversy. It threatened to split Unitarianism into 2 or even 3 different bodies. But let's just say that it was a complex theological hot mess. Now, in the middle of all this, at the 1887 annual conference of Western Unitarians, the Reverend William Channing Gannett presented a non-binding statement of ethical principles called "Things Most Commonly Believed Among Us Today." Real catchy title. But he was trying to bring both sides together. So drawing on the tradition of the Transcendentalists, Gannett asserted that living and loving the good was the essence of religion. That reason and conscience were the final authorities in matters of belief. The universe was beautiful, beneficent, and orderly, and that there should be nothing counted as good for oneself if it was not good for all, and all things work together for the victory of the good. And concluding, he wrote, "We worship one and all, that life whence suns and stars derive their orbits, and the soul of humans their ought." Now, after some strong debate, of course, the statement was adopted by the Western Unitarians and later by those in the East, with a few amendments because we're Unitarians. And by 1894, the controversy was resolved in favor of widening our circle of liberal inclusivity. Unitarianism was redefined and did not split. Now then, of course, in 1936, during the social upheaval of the Great Depression, the Unitarian Commission of Appraisal published a study that reaffirmed the values found in Gannett's statement and added a commitment to create a just social order. So our modern statement of principles, drawing on these older commitments, they were included in our 1961 UU bylaws. And there have been several updates, including one in 1985 that added the seventh principle of respect for the interdependent web. Now, in 2017, the UUA Board of Trustees created the Commission on Institutional Change, which conducted an audit of power structures and an analysis of systemic racist practices within our UUA. And then they use this knowledge to more faithfully live our principles in the larger society. The report is called Widening the Circle of Our Concern, which David Strickler spoke about last Sunday. And we are considering adding an eighth principle to highlight our growing commitment to diversity and multiculturalism, as I already said. And just to refresh your memories, our principles call us to covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity, of course, justice, equity, and compassion. You can see this on Roman numeral page 10 in your hymnal. Justice, equity, and compassion, acceptance of one another, spiritual growth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, use of the democratic process, a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, and then the eighth, which brings us to an accountable dismantling of racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Now, 156 congregations have voted to support the addition of the eighth principle, and they're reviewing their practices right now of hospitality and stewardship and faith formation and education and more in light of this new possible potential commitment. Now, with the eighth principle, we seek to articulate a liberating theology for Unitarian Universalism today that is anti-oppressive, multicultural, and accountable to the richness of our diverse heritage. So our ever-evolving statement of theological commitment has become woven into the fabric of our congregational life. Principles are printed in the front of the hymnal. They're printed in congregational orders of service. They're posted on church walls, in children's classrooms. They're used in new member ceremonies and recited when we're installing our congregational leaders. The Reverend Ann Treadwell said that the responsibilities of membership can be summed up as a thoughtful commitment to the principles, and making such a commitment can change lives. Commitment to our principles has the potential to change lives. But as Linus said, there's no heavier burden than great potential. And we come back to my first question. Can we be the UUs we want to be? Can we live our principles when they're being challenged again and again in a time of social change? Now, of course, we have a history of living our principles in public. Unitarians and Universalists, and then later UUs, have been involved in abolition and women's suffrage and prison reform and civil rights and LGBTQ liberation and climate justice and so much more. Many people come to our UU congregations because of our active voice in the community on important social issues. So history's now put us on the forefront of prophetic action to widen our circle of concern for those oppressed and marginalized today. And we're called to see that our efforts are a form of spiritual practice that's necessary to live out our faith today, to be what we are to become. So in our ever-changing world, new concerns challenge our commitment to these principles and asks us, how can we authentically live into these unless we investigate and invest in new ways of understanding that guide us into this future? So a recent book by Dr. Timothy Snyder, it's called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. He says that America's facing a major new threat to the democratic principles we all hold and our ideals of diversity and inclusivity. He says this threat is similar to the ones presented in the first half of the 20th century, which saw democracies attacked by fascism and communism. Our one advantage, he says, is that we can learn from this history. So Dr. Snyder's book offers these 20 lessons, but I'm going to only lift up a couple of them right now so that you can see how they tie into some of our principles, including the potential eighth one. Dr. Snyder says we need to be aware of efforts to move from democracy to nationalistic autocracy and one-party power. So after World War I and World War II, the political parties that remade states and oppressed rivals were not omnipotent when they started. Instead, they exploited the apathy and political exhaustion in their societies to make political life impossible for their opponents. Today, the same autocratically inclined factions that led to the insurrection in Washington, D.C. on January 6th are now working to silence opposition through state gerrymandering, voter suppression, and anti-protest laws. We see elected officials seeking to deny the worth of others and continue structures of systemic racism by proposing literally hundreds of new anti-voter laws to block the voices of people of color and their allies at the polls. Now, these laws can be as obvious as banning early voting on Sundays or requiring a state photo ID and making it very difficult to obtain that ID, or as subtle as a seemingly small shift in polling place locations, or cutting back on early voting hours in the evening, which severely impact working people. And we see attacks on First Amendment rights in bills like Ohio House Bill 109 that seeks to penalize people for protesting for justice, like we did after the murder of George Floyd a couple of years ago. So when we work to support a multiracial and multicultural democracy, we are supporting our commitment to the UU principles of equity, right of conscience, use of the democratic process, as well as our principle of honoring the worth and dignity of all. And our proposed eighth principle calls us now to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community and dismantle the racism and oppressions that we see around us and in us. And in this commitment, we uphold the idea that for democracy to work for all of us, it must include us all. So both Dr. Snyder and our principles urge us to support the search for truth in the middle of a blizzard of misinformation, because as people of faith, we're called to publicly name sacred and social truths, even in the middle of lies. And whether it's the lie of a stolen election or the lie of white supremacy, our principles call us to that responsible search for truth and meaning. And we also need to learn how to stay calm and focused, even when unthinkable events happen, because modern tyranny is terror management. Authoritarians exploit emergencies and terrorist attacks, or even create lies about riots or terrorist attacks where there are none, all to consolidate power. There's a lot of work ahead of us all. Systems of racism and injustice, and voter suppression and big lies, and the movement to consolidate power in the hands of a few are all deeply rooted in the unhealthiest parts of our society. And our principles, all 7 of them, actually all 8 of them, should be our guiding light in these unhealthy times. And we know that legislation alone will not eradicate these evils, but like all justice movements, passing strong legislation is still necessary. And our elected leaders must pass legislation that will protect us from anti-democratic, racist, autocratic forces. And we may have to go out of our way by phone or on foot or on text to remind our elected leaders of their duties. Because powerful forces want us sitting in our TV chairs, wallowing in feelings of individual helplessness and hopelessness. And to combat this, we need to show up with others when called and exercise our rights to assemble, speak, and protest. The struggle for human liberation does not happen in isolation. It is a communal struggle that draws on our commitment to the web of existence and the worth of all. And we may have to put our bodies in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people to march together for justice. Now, Dr. Snyder says that it's easy to follow along to get along. And it can be incredibly scary to do or say something different from the rest of the authoritarian crowd. But commitment to our principles demands that we face our own fright. The author, Anne Voskamp, said, "Any dead fish can go with the flow." You have to be intentionally alive to swim against the current. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King once noted that the greatest tragedy in the period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. When we set an example of justice in action, we break that spell of the big lies. Others will hear, they will follow into that wider circle of concern. So we need to be as courageous as we can be in the face of the threats we see in 2022. Late John Lewis said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime." So in summary, we know that in 2022, there'll be more change and turbulence. Oh, yes. There will be more chances to question what's really important in our lives. And there will be even more opportunity to choose who we want to be as UUs in the face of what the world throws at us. And by adopting the 8th principle, we will announce to the world our commitment to create that inclusive, beloved community that is anti-racist, that does support the multicultural, multiracial democracy we desire, and honors the worth and dignity of all. We'll be choosing to widen our circle of concern and live more fully into our potential of what we can become. So a year from now, I look forward to seeing all of us living our potential, examining, renewing our principles, and becoming more fully the Unitarian Universalists we want to be, and may it be so. Amen.
Thank you very much, Reverend VanBecelaere. Now is the time of our offering. These words by Alan Johnson Fay. The offering is a sacrament of the free church. It is supported by the voluntary generosity of all who join us. The offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation of our shared hope and values. At the end of the service, there is a collection basket out on the table in the lobby. You're invited to place your offering in the basket. For those of you watching this service at home, you can go to online to uutoledo.org, click on Give, and then click on Online Giving to make your offering at home. Or you can mail a check to the church to the First Unitarian Church of Toledo, 3205 Glendale Avenue, Toledo, Ohio, 43614. And coming soon, next Sunday, April 3rd, on Spiritual Adventures at 9:45 on Zoom, there will be a roundtable discussion on the effects of the pandemic with the congregation. And at 11 a.m., our very own Patty Sheehan will lead our service on the topic of our spiritual connection to food. And following the service today in Fellowship Hall, you're invited to join us for coffee hour. Fellowship Hall can be reached straight out the door. Just follow the group on down to a door on your left.
Thank you, Karen. Our closing words today are brought to us by the Reverend David Bumbaugh, who, as a Universalist originally before our consolidation in 61, was a Universalist minister before consolidation. And he draws on the Universalist tradition in his blessing. He says, "We as Unitarian Universalists are dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences and beneath all of our diversity, there's a unity which makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity." Amen.
The chalice is extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and hearts and souls of each one of us as we strive to become the best Unitarian Universalists we can be. Just wanted that to be a stirring as Reverend VanBecelaere